You clicked because the title made you stop. Why Vikings slept through storms that tore homes apart. The truth sits inside one longhouse in the far north. Inside it lived a family who faced winds strong enough to lift roofs and pull walls from the earth. Yet their youngest, a small boy named Leaf, slept through every storm while grown warriors paced the floors in fear. His mother said he carried the calm of old spirits. His father said he heard something in the storm that others missed. But when the strongest winter wind in years reached their homeland, the storm hit with force that pulled doors from hinges. Walls bent, animals cried out, men shouted, and Leaf still slept. What he sensed during that night changed how his clan survived storms for seasons to come. The night the great storm reached Leif's homeland started like most winter nights. Cold air, dark skies, a slow rumble across the ridge. But when the wind grew sharp enough to cut through the walls of the longhouse, every grown warrior woke at once. They grabbed beams. They held the roof ropes. They shouted orders through the roar. But one person did not stir. Leif slept through it, through the cracking wood, through the door ripping open, through the wind that stole breath from his parents. No one understood why, not yet. But by the end of that night, his strange calm would guide his family through danger no one thought they would survive. Before the storm rises in our story, take a slow breath with me. Let your shoulders relax. Let the air settle in your room. If you rest under a blanket, pull it close. If your lights glow bright, lower them for a gentler mood. Tell me where you watch from tonight. I enjoy knowing the places these quiet Viking stories reach. If these calm longhouse tales bring you peace, feel free to offer a soft like or a quiet subscribe. A gentle comment helps me know which stories you want next. Settle in now. The wind outside the longhouse grows colder. Leif lies still on his straw bed. His parents brace the door. The storm begins. The wind hit the longhouse before anyone inside woke. At first, it scraped over the roof like a slow hand across old wood. The walls gave a low groan. The embers in the hearth shifted. A thin line of snow dust slipped through the gap near the rafters. No one moved yet. The night still held its usual silence. Then the next gust came. It struck the longhouse like a blunt strike from a thick shield. The walls shook. A wooden stool toppled. A clay bowl rattled against the floor. Liv, the mother in the house, opened her eyes at once. She kept her breath low. She listened. She knew the signs of winter storms better than most in her clan. She understood the layers of wind. The sounds told her how close danger sat. She heard something different in this one. Something heavy. Something far stronger than storms she faced in the past. She pushed herself up. Her blankets hung from her shoulders as she stood. She pulled them close to stay warm. The draft from the roof cut across her skin. She whispered her husband's name. Arna. He already stirred. He sat up before she reached him. His hand moved to the wall behind him. He placed his palm on the wood. He waited for the next gust. It came fast. The longhouse shook again. Dust fell from above. The door thumped against its hinge rope. Arna stood without a word. He reached for the thick support pole near the center of the house. His fingers traced the rope he tied the day before. He checked the knots. He checked the beam. His muscles tightened as he listened for the next hit. Liv reached him. "It feels stronger than last week," she said. He nodded. "It builds fast." His voice stayed low, steady. "The ridge winds turned last night. I thought they would calm by moonrise." Another gust smashed into the side of the house. The sound tore through the room. Their daughter Sina woke with a short cry. She sat up on her bedding near the warm side of the hearth. She pressed her hands over her ears. She looked toward her parents. Liv moved to her quick and pulled her close. "It is only wind," Liv whispered. "Stay near me." Sina tried to steady her breath. She watched her father move across the room. He walked toward the door. He pushed his shoulder against it. The wind hit again. The door shook in its frame. Arna lowered his head. He closed his eyes for a moment. He listened. He counted the seconds between gusts. He tried to learn the rhythm of the storm. But something felt off. The pattern changed each time the wind hit. No steady pulse, no slow build, no break long enough to steady the house. He pressed his shoulder harder. He checked the rope that held the top beam. A tight knot. Good rope. But he knew rope lost strength in cold storms. If the wind reached its peak by dawn, he feared the door rope would not hold long. Liv helped Sina settle again. She tucked a blanket over her daughter's shoulders. Sina leaned her head against her mother. Her eyes stayed wide. Each gust shook the floor. She looked toward the smaller bed across the room where her little brother slept. Leif. He lay still, his hair spread across the old hay. His arms rested by his sides. His small chest rose in slow breaths. He did not move when the wind roared. He did not open his eyes when a wooden bucket rolled across the floor. He slept with the same calm he held on quiet mornings. Liv looked at him, her mouth tightened. "He sleeps through too much," she said. Arn lifted his head from the door. He glanced at his son. "He always has." "No child sleeps through storms like this," she said. The walls shook again. A rope near the rafters popped against a beam. Snow poured in through the crack at the roof. Arna pushed hard against the door. "He hears something we do not," he said. "He listens to something else in the wind." "He ignores danger," Liv said. "That is not a gift." Arna said nothing. He strengthened his hold on the door. He braced one foot against the wall. He forced the frame to stay steady. Leif shifted once on his bed, not from fear, not from the storm, more like a slow turn and quiet rest. His breathing stayed even. Liv moved close to him. She placed her hand on his forehead. Warm, peaceful, too peaceful. The storm roared like a pushed bull outside. Yet this child slept as if he reached some soft dream far from danger. Sina curled closer to her mother's leg. She whispered, "Why does he not wake? I wake, you wake. Father wakes. Why not him?" Liv stroked her daughter's hair. "He sleeps with strange calm." Another gust crashed into the roof. A loud crack split through the room. Arna turned at once. He saw the top beam bending. Snow burst in through the gap above the rafters. The rope shifted. He looked at Liv. "Get the children. Bring them to the center." Liv grabbed Sina's hand. She moved quick. She lifted Leif from his bed. He did not wake. His head rested against her shoulder. She pressed both children against the thick center support beam, the strongest post in the house. Arna grabbed every rope he stored near the wall. He tied them around his forearms. He ran to the rafter line. He threw one rope across the beam and pulled it tight. The storm struck again. He felt the longhouse lean. Liv held her children close. Her body shielded them. She kept her breathing slow to keep Sina steady. The wind rose to a scream outside. The longhouse shook harder than before. The fire spit sparks across the floor. The smoke drifted sideways from the force of the wind. Arna pressed the rope tight. He grunted as the beam strained. Then the door burst open. Snow shot inside like a thrown wave. A blast of cold air hit everyone in the room at once. The fire scattered. Sparks flew across the dirt floor. Sina screamed. Liv pulled her closer. She turned her back to the door to shield her daughter. Arna stumbled from the force. He rushed toward the door. He grabbed the frame. He tried to pull it shut. The wind ripped at his arms. It pushed him back. He dug his heels into the dirt. He leaned his entire weight into the door. He shouted over the storm. "Help me hold it!" Liv looked at him. She held both children tight. She could not move without leaving them exposed. Sina cried out. Leif still slept. Arna pressed harder. His breath tore from his chest as the storm hit again. He pulled the door inward. He felt the hinge rope stretch. He felt the wood bend. He held on. Then a small sound rose behind him, a soft breath, a slow breath. He looked over his shoulder. Leif's eyes opened, not from fear, not from cold, not from the blast of wind that ripped through the room. He opened them the same way he did on calm mornings. Liv watched him. Her arms tightened around both children. She felt something strange in that moment. Not comfort, not fear, something else. Leif turned his head toward the open door, toward the storm, his eyes fixed on the dark outside. The wind roared, yet he looked steady. Arn pushed again. The door moved an inch. He growled through clenched teeth. "Leif!" he shouted. "Stay with your mother!" But the boy stepped forward. Liv grabbed his arm. "Leif!" He slowed. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back toward the storm. His body leaned forward again. Arna fought the wind with the strength of a trained warrior. His muscles burned. His shoulder trembled under the force. He prepared for another gust. It hit him hard. He lost a foot of ground. The door flung wider. Snow swept through the room. A wooden cup shot across the floor and struck the far wall. Liv shielded Sina, but Leif pulled away from her hand. He took another step toward his father. His face held no fear. Arna saw him. "No!" Arna barked. "Do not come closer!" But Leif did. He reached his small hands forward. He pressed them against the door beside his father. His fingers spread against the wood. Arna looked at him. Shock hit him harder than the wind. "What are you doing?" Leif did not answer. He only pressed his hands harder. The storm smashed into the door again. The frame shuddered. Arna braced for the worst. But something strange happened. The pressure on the door shifted. The wind still roared. The house still shook. But the weight on the door changed shape, as if something pulled against it in another direction. Arna felt the shift through the wood. Leif pushed harder. His eyes stayed fixed outside. For the first time since the storm started, the door moved inward. Arna pulled it closer, inch by inch. Not from his strength alone. Something about the boy's steady pressure changed the balance. Liv stared. She held Sina close. Snow settled in her hair. Her heart pounded, but she saw the change. Arna forced the door shut. He pushed a thick beam into place. He used the last rope to tie the frame. He pulled knots tight. He pressed his shoulder against the wood again. The wind hit. The door held. For now. Arna turned to his son. Leif lowered his hands. He stepped back. His breathing stayed slow. Arna knelt in front of him. His voice dropped low. "Why did you move toward the storm?" Leif looked at him with calm eyes. "I heard something." Arna froze. "What did you hear?" "The wind spoke," Leif said. Liv felt her skin chill. She held Sina tighter. Arna looked at his son. "What did it say?" Leif tilted his head. His voice stayed soft. "It said the roof would not fall yet." Arna stared at him for a long moment. Outside, the storm screamed across the ridge. The house shook again. Snow rattled the roof. Wind pressed against the boards. Arne stood slow. Liv looked at him. "What do we do?" "We hold through the night," Arne said. He kept his eyes on Leif. "We stay near the center beam." Sina clung to her mother's side. She stared at her brother with wide eyes. Liv moved both children to the warmest place in the room. Arne stayed near the door. He kept his hand on the beam. He watched the rope. He listened for each gust. Leif sat near the center post. His eyes drifted closed again. Within moments, he slept. Liv watched him. Her thoughts twisted inside her chest. She feared for him. She feared for the house. She feared for the storm. But she also felt something new. If her son heard something in the wind that others did not, this night would not be the last time he sensed danger before others. She reached for Sina's hand. She pulled her close. Arne braced the door again. He kept his breath slow. He prepared for the long hours still ahead. Outside, the storm grew stronger, still rising, still building. The strongest part had not yet arrived, and the boy slept. The storm held through most of the night. Each gust pressed against the longhouse as if it tried to tear the roof free. Snow piled at the lower walls. The door ropes groaned with each strike. Arne kept his shoulder against the frame. He moved only when he needed to warm his hands near the embers. His back ached. His arms burned. But he stayed alert. Liv stayed near the children. Sina fell asleep against her mother's side after hours of trembling. Liv wrapped a hide around her shoulders and stroked her hair. She checked Leif often. His sleep held firm. His breath stayed slow. His face stayed calm. Almost too calm for a storm like this. The hours passed. The wind's voice changed as morning neared. It lost its sharp edge. It softened. The gusts fell out of rhythm. The strongest force drifted away. The house still shook, but not like before. Arne lowered his head. He placed both hands on his knees. He let out a long breath. "It weakens." Liv lifted her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He stepped from the door. The wood held on its own for the first time since the hinge rope snapped. He touched the frame. It trembled only from leftover wind, not from the force of the storm's heart. Sina stirred. She rubbed her eyes. "Is it morning?" "Almost," Liv whispered. Leif slept. His head rested against the post. His hands lay open at his sides. Arne looked at him for a long moment. Then he knelt beside him and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Leif, wake." The boy's eyes opened at once. He lifted his head slow. He studied the room before he spoke. "It is quiet." Arne nodded. "The storm weakens." Leif looked at the door. He blinked once. "The ropes will hold now." Arne felt a cold shift in his chest. He sat back. His eyes moved between his son's face and the door frame. Liv noticed the look. She set her hand on Leif's hair. "You said the wind spoke," she said. "Did it speak again?" "No," Leif answered. "It stopped." Arne rubbed his face with both hands. Sina crawled toward her brother. She reached his arm. "Why do you not fear storms?" Leif looked down. "They do not call me." Sina frowned. "They call me." Liv pulled both children close. She brushed snow from their blankets. She rose and took a step toward Arne. "We must clear the roof before snow melts into the beam gaps," she said. He nodded. "I will check outside." He wrapped his cloak around his shoulders. He pulled his boots on. He tightened the straps at his calves. He glanced at Leif once more before he lifted the door beam. He opened the door. Snow pushed inward in a slow slide, not a violent blast. The storm had passed its worst. The wind still moved across the ridge, but with a tired sound. Arna stepped outside. The world lay under a thick blanket of snow. The wind carried slow curls of frost across the ground. The sky held the pale blue of early morning. His breath rose in thin clouds. He looked at the roof. Snow piled high across its length. The weight added a risk. If the roof held this long under the storm, it might not hold under the weight now. Liv stepped outside behind him. She tightened her cloak. Her hair lifted with the soft wind. She looked at the roof too. "We clear it fast," Arna said. She nodded. "I will bring the rake." She walked back inside. Sina followed her. Leif stepped into the doorway. He stared at the sky. He tilted his head a little, the same way he did when the storm first hit. Arna watched him. "What do you hear now?" he asked. Leif did not lift his eyes from the sky. "Nothing." "Good." Arna picked up a wooden rake. "Then help me with the ground. Leave the roof to me and your mother." Liv came out with a second rake. Sina walked behind her with a small shovel. Arna looked at the three of them. "Stay near the house," he said. "The snow piles deep farther out." Liv began scraping the roof edge. Arna climbed the small ladder they built for winter storms. He moved slow to avoid slipping. He reached the roof and pushed snow aside. He worked in long strokes. Leif stayed near the doorway. He did not move far. He watched the sky. He watched the snow. His small hands stayed at his sides. He listened with the same quiet focus he held during the storm. Sina shoveled snow near the entrance. She huffed each time the wind pushed it back toward her. Liv guided her. "Keep your legs spread wide," Liv said. "Push with your body, not your arms." Sina tried again. This time the snow moved farther. Arna cleared the top of the roof. He paused for a moment. He looked toward the ridge. Something caught his eye. He tightened his grip on the rake. Liv noticed him freeze. She stepped closer. "What is it?" she asked. He did not answer at first. He stared toward the ridgeline, where the path curved down from the forest. A shape moved through the trees, not fast, not slow, a steady shape. The wind carried bits of snow that swirled around it. It grew clearer as it neared. A man. Arna narrowed his eyes. Liv felt her breath hitch. Visitors during storms brought trouble. The man stepped out from the tree line. He walked with his hood low. Snow covered his shoulders. His boots pushed through the deep drifts. Leif stepped forward. Arna saw him move from the corner of his eye. "Leif, stay by the door." Leif slowed. He looked at the approaching figure. He did not speak. The man walked closer. His cloak hung heavy. A thin line of frost marked his beard. He stopped a few steps from the edge of their cleared ground. Arna climbed down from the roof. He stood in front of his family. His hand rested on the wooden handle of the rake. He kept his posture calm. "Who are you?" Arna asked. The stranger lifted his face. His eyes held a deep, worn look. His voice sounded rough from cold. "I walked from the high ridge," he said. "I seek the clan at the river edge." Arna studied him. "You passed them. Their smoke rises farther south," the man nodded. "I did not see their homes through the storm." Liv stepped forward. "What brings you through weather like this?" The man's gaze moved to Leif. He spoke slow. "I followed a sound through the night." Arna's breath stopped for a moment. Liv lowered her hand to Sina's shoulder. "What sound?" she asked. The man looked at Leif again. "A voice in the wind." Arna stepped between him and the children. "What voice?" "Not mine to name," the man said. "Only mine to follow." Arna tightened his grip on the rake. "Storm winds do not carry voices." The man's eyes held steady. Some do. Silence spread through the air. Even the wind quieted as if it listened. Leif walked forward. Liv reached for him. Leif! He slipped past her hand. He stopped in front of the stranger, his head lifted only a little. He stared at him without fear. The man knelt. What did the wind say to you last night? He asked Leif. Leif looked toward the sky again. It said the roof would not fall. The man exhaled. He closed his eyes. Arna stepped forward fast. Do not come near him again. The stranger rose. You think I mean harm. I see a man who walks through a storm toward my home, Arna said, and who watches my son more than he watches me. The man bowed his head. Forgive me, I keep no blade, I keep no threat in my hand. He opened his cloak. Nothing hung at his belt. No axe, no knife, only a thin piece of carved wood. I followed the wind, he said. It carried a strange calm. I walked toward it. Liv looked at Leif. Her throat tightened. Arna did not lower his guard. Why would you follow calm in a storm? The man's tone softened. Because I lost my own calm long before sunrise. The wind moved a few strands of his hair. Snow drifted around his feet. Arna asked, What did you lose? My son, the man said. He left our home before the storm. He walked to the ridge. The storm swallowed his trail. I followed the only thing that did not sound like danger. Arna looked at him with new eyes. Liv's shoulders eased. Sina stepped behind her mother. Leif blinked slow. Your son did not go toward danger. The man's eyes moved to him. Do you know where he walked? Leif turned toward the ridgeline. He raised his hand and pointed toward a narrow path between the trees. He walked there, Leif said. Arna froze. Liv felt her heart beat in her ear. The man looked toward the path. His breath shook. Are you sure? Leif nodded once. He walked before the storm hit. He did not fall. The man covered his mouth with his hand. He lowered his head. A small sound escaped him. Relief. Grief. Both. Arna looked at the path. Liv, watch the children. He stepped forward. If your son went there, we will search. The man lifted his head. I will search with you. Liv spoke. The storm left deep snow. It takes strength to push through it. The man nodded. I still have enough strength for him. Leif walked to Liv's side. He tugged her sleeve. He pointed again at the ridge. He waits near the old birch. Liv looked at him. How do you know? Leif pressed his hand to his chest. The wind told me where fear stopped. Arna and the stranger stared at him. The wind brushed through the yard. Soft, gentle. Arna tightened his cloak around his shoulders. We go. Liv reached for his arm. She held it for a moment. Return safe. He nodded once. He looked at the man. Stay close. Do not wander from the path. The man followed. Liv gathered both children. She watched the two figures push through the snow toward the ridgeline. Leif leaned into her side. Do not fear, he said. Liv held him close. I am not sure what to feel, she whispered. Leif looked toward the trees. The wind will not lie. Arna and the stranger pressed through the deep snow. Each step sank to the shin. The storm left uneven drifts that reached the knee in some places and hid frozen branches under the surface. Arna kept his eyes on the narrow path Leif pointed to. The stranger stayed at his side. His breath came out in heavy bursts. Frost clung to his beard. The forest near the ridge held a strange quiet. Storms often left broken branches, scattered pine needles, or the distant groan of shifting ice. But this stretch stayed still. Snow rested on the branches without sliding. The air held no sharp bite now. A tired calm settled over everything. Arna paused when they reached the slope. He looked back toward the longhouse. It stood strong against the fading stormlight. Smoke rose from the hearth vent. Liv moved near the entrance with the children. Even at this distance, he saw Leif looking their way. The stranger followed Arna's gaze. "He feels more than he says." Arna didn't answer. He lifted his foot and pressed forward. The path narrowed as they entered the trees. A thick birch trunk stood ahead. Its branches reached low, heavy with snow. Arna remembered it from past winters. Hunters used it as a marker. Travelers used it to rest. Children played near its roots in the warmer months. The stranger stopped when he saw it. "My son liked this tree," he said. "He climbed it when he was small." Arna gave a short nod. "If he sheltered here, we will find signs." They moved closer. Snow lay undisturbed at first, but as Arna stepped around the far side of the trunk, he saw something half buried under a drift. A mark. He brushed the snow away with the back of his glove. A footprint, small, not a grown man's, not a child's either, a young boy's. The stranger dropped to his knees. His hands shook as he cleared more snow. "Eric," he whispered. "He stood here." Arna looked toward the deeper forest. More tracks ahead. He followed them. The stranger pushed past him, fueled by fear and hope at once. The tracks led down a slight slope. They curved around a fallen log. They stopped near a cluster of rocks. Arn kneeled beside them. "He stood here for a long time," he said. "See how the snow sank deeper? He waited, or he listened." The stranger nodded. "He listened for me." Arna scanned the trees. The forest opened slightly beyond the rocks. The light changed there. He heard a faint rustle. He lifted a hand to stop the stranger from rushing forward. A low sound moved through the trees. Not wind, not ice falling, something alive. Arna reached for the small knife at his belt. He signaled the stranger to stay close. They stepped toward the clearing. Something shifted behind the brush. Arna braced himself. A shape pushed through the snow. A boy, thin, shivering, his cloak torn at one side, his hair plastered to his forehead from melted frost. The stranger shouted his son's name. "Eric!" The boy lifted his head. His eyes widened, his lips parted. "Father?" The man ran forward. He fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around his son. Eric tried to lift his arms. His strength failed halfway. The stranger held him tight. Snow slid from their cloaks. Arna waited until the moment settled. Then he stepped closer. "Are you hurt?" he asked the boy. Eric shook his head weakly. "I lost the ridge path. Snow rose too fast. I stayed by the rocks. The wind told me to wait." Arna froze. The stranger looked at him, then at his son. "What wind?" he asked. Eric lowered his gaze. "A soft wind. It spoke far away. It told me where calm waited." Arna felt the same cold shift in his chest that he felt when Leif looked at the sky. "You followed calm?" Arna asked. "Yes," Eric said. "I walked until the wind grew warm. Then I stopped." The stranger closed his eyes. His grip tightened. Arna knelt beside them. "We must get him back to the longhouse. He needs warmth." The stranger rose with the boy in his arms. Eric shivered. Arna wrapped his own cloak around them. He tightened it at the neck. "Stay close," Arna said. They pushed through the snow again, retracing their path. The wind brushed the trees with soft breaths. Nothing sharp, nothing wild. The forest felt like it exhaled relief. When they reached the birch tree, the stranger paused. He touched the trunk with one hand. "I thought he froze," he whispered. Arn glanced toward the longhouse. "Winter takes many, But your boy listened to something I do not understand. The stranger gave him a tired smile. I do not understand it either. As they neared the clearing, Leif stepped forward from the doorway. Liv tried to pull him back, but the boy shook her hand off. He walked across the snow faster than Arna expected. Arna called out, Leif, stay near the house. Leif ignored him. He stopped in front of Eric and the stranger. He looked at the stranger's son with calm eyes. You heard the same wind, Leif said. Eric swallowed weakly. I think so. Arna reached them. He placed a firm hand on Leif's shoulder. That is enough, he said. Leif continued to stare at the boy. His voice stayed quiet. He heard fear first, Leif said. Then he heard stillness. The stillness told him to stop by the rocks. Eric nodded slowly. Liv stepped in. Bring him inside. He needs heat. They moved into the longhouse. Arna pushed the door closed behind them. The embers at the hearth glowed. Liv added dry wood and blew until flames rose. Sina fetched a blanket. Leif placed a carved wooden cup near the hearth to warm before filling it with water. The stranger laid Eric near the fire. The boy curled into the blanket. His shaking eased. Liv pressed a warm cloth to his hands. The stranger looked at Arna. He would have died in the forest. Arna nodded. He survived because he stopped moving. A boy who stops in a storm listens to something strong. Eric looked at Leif again. Was it the same voice for you? Leif sat near him, his legs crossed. He studied Eric without blinking. It is not a voice, he said. It is a gap in the wind, a place with no fear. Eric breathed out. Yes, that is what I felt. Arna and Liv shared a silent glance. Sina stood close to her mother, wide-eyed. The stranger touched his son's hair. You followed the right guide, Arna's voice lowered. Do you always hear it? Leif nodded. When the wind holds danger, the gap shows where danger stops. Liv sat beside him. How long have you heard this? Leif shrugged. Always. Arna exhaled. He rested a hand over his mouth. He did not know what to say. The stranger looked at him. Your son has a gift my clan once spoke of. Arna stiffened. Gift? The man nodded. Old hunters said the wind carried two sounds, one for danger, one for safety. They said a few rare children could tell them apart. My grandmother spoke of them. She said they kept families alive during harsh winters. Arna stared at Leif. Why our son? The stranger smiled faintly. Why any child? Eric shifted under his blanket. Can you teach me to hear it? Leif shook his head. I do not teach. You will hear it again when the wind speaks to you. The stranger's eyes softened. He placed a hand on his son's back. Arna sat near the fire and rubbed his temples. Liv brushed snow from her sleeves and looked at him. She whispered, This explains the storms. Arna nodded. I know. Sina walked closer to them. Does this mean Leif speaks to storms? Leif answered before Arna could. I do not speak to storms. I hear where they do not reach. Liv shivered at the phrasing. The stranger took a long breath. My clan must hear this story. They lost many to storms last winter. They would want to know a child survived by listening to calm inside danger. Arna raised his brow. You want to spread tale of a boy who hears wind? I want families to know storms leave gaps, safe places, moments that guide. Arna nodded slowly. You speak truth, but speak it without naming my son. The stranger bowed his head. I will honor that. Liv handed Eric a warm cup. He sipped slowly. His color improved. Arna stood. The storm winter gathers strength this season. More storms will come. The stranger agreed. Then more families need to hold to calm. Leif turned toward the door. He listened again. He lifted his head. "The next storm waits," he said. Arna stiffened. "How far?" "Days," Leif said. "Not near, not far. Waiting." Liv closed her eyes. "We need more wood, more rope, more thatch." Arna nodded. "We prepare today." The stranger tightened his cloak. "Let me help. It is the least I owe." Arna extended a hand to him. "Stay through the next storm. Then you return to your clan with your son." The stranger accepted the handshake. Eric smiled weakly at Leif. "Will you sit with me until I sleep?" Leif nodded. "Yes." The two boys sat near the fire. The glow warmed their faces. Eric leaned back slowly. Leif stayed upright, watching the flames as if they carried messages he understood. Arna and Leif stepped outside to gather snow for water. Sina followed them. The stranger remained inside with the boys. The wind brushed the longhouse again, not sharp, not cold. A steady breath, a hint of calm before storms to come. The next morning brought a pale sky and a sharp cold that cut with each breath. Arna stepped outside before the sun cleared the ridge. Frost clung to every beam of the longhouse. Snow crackled beneath his boots. The storm left deep drifts that reached the waist in untouched places. Smoke rose from the roof vent in a slow, steady trail. He listened to the quiet, the kind of quiet that followed only after storms that drained the land. He looked toward the ridge. The forest still held its blanket of white. No wind pushed through the branches. He sensed another storm ahead. They all felt it after Leif spoke of it. But this morning felt like borrowed calm, time they needed. The stranger stepped outside behind him. His breath left in long plumes. Eric slept near the fire, with Liv watching him. The man wrapped his cloak tighter. "Thank you," he said, "for shelter." Arna nodded. "You helped me search. I return what you gave." The stranger looked over the snow. "We must store more wood." "We will," Arna said. "We need a full stack before sunset." Sina came out next. She pushed against the cold. Her boots left small prints in the frost. She rubbed her arms. "Mother said not to wander," she said. Arna ruffled her hair. "Then stay close. You can help gather fallen branches." Sina grinned and darted toward a low pine. Leif stepped outside last. He squinted at the light. He scanned the sky as if he listened without sound. His shoulders rose as he breathed in. He lowered his head. "The new storm wakes," he said. The stranger watched him. "Does it grow fast?" Leif shook his head. "Not fast. Slow." Arna exhaled. "Good, we have time." Liv appeared at the doorway with Eric's empty cup. She spoke to Arna. "He eats well. Color returns." Arna nodded. "He will be strong before the next storm." The stranger bowed his head in thanks. They set to work. Arna and the man walked to the wood pile behind the house. They lifted thick logs. They tested each one for rot. They stacked them inside the shed built from old beams. Sina dragged smaller branches to Liv. Liv tied them in bundles with rope. She stacked them along the wall. Leif stood near the path and watched the sky again and again. Arna kept his eyes on him. He studied each of his son's movements. Leif moved with no rush. He moved only when he felt something shift. Arna had seen hunters with less awareness. He had seen elders less attuned to wind changes. At midday, they rested. Liv brought broth to the men. Sina held a bowl close to her chest. Eric came out wrapped in a blanket. He ate slow spoonfuls as he sat on a block of wood. The stranger placed his arm behind him to support him. "Tell me why you left home," he said. Eric looked down. "I heard my friend's name." Arna blinked. "Friend?" Eric nodded. "My friend who died last winter. I heard him. He called me to the ridge. The stranger lowered his head. His voice broke. Eric, I know he is gone, Eric said, but I heard his name in the snow. It sounded like him. I followed the sound. Leif stepped closer. You heard fear. Eric looked at him. How? Leif sat beside him. Fear often takes the voice of someone you trust. Eric swallowed. The wind said his name. Then the wind told me to stop. Leif nodded. The wind stopped the fear. Arne felt a cold tightness in his chest. He had always feared storms for their strength. Now he feared what his son sensed inside them. Liv rested her hand on Arne's shoulder. He is safe now. Arne nodded, but worry lingered. After they ate, Arne and the stranger went back to work. Sina and Liv continued tying bundles. Eric stayed near the fire vent with Leif sitting beside him. As the morning passed, the sky dimmed, not with clouds, with distance. The next storm waited far off. Leif lifted his head often. His eyes narrowed. He did not look afraid. He looked aware. Near midday, he stood suddenly. Arne saw him from behind the shed. Leif stepped toward the forest path. Arne dropped the wooden beam he held. He hurried toward him. Where are you going? Leif lifted his hand toward the ridge. It pulls. Arne grabbed his shoulders and spun him around. No, you do not walk toward storms. Leif looked up at him. His face held no fear. I walk toward calm. Arne tightened his grip. Calm can turn. You stay near the house. Liv walked over fast. What happened? Leif said. The storm wants to move. I need to know where. Arne spoke before Liv could answer. No, you stay here. The stranger approached. Eric followed behind him. Leif turned toward the ridgeline again. It grows, Arne pointed toward the longhouse. Inside, now. Leif didn't resist. He walked inside. Sina followed. Eric paused by the door. Is it wrong to hear the wind? He asked. Arne rubbed his forehead. No, but the forest takes boys who wander. Eric nodded. Inside, the air warmed. Smoke curled from the hearth. Leif sat near the fire. His hands lay against his knees. Liv knelt beside him. Does the storm frighten you? No, he said. It presses against something. What? Liv asked. Leif pointed toward the north. A gap, a hole in the storm. It is small now. It grows bigger. Liv looked confused. What does that mean? Leif said nothing. Arne sat across from him. Does the storm move toward us? Leif shook his head. Not yet. It circles. Arne rubbed his jaw. He looked at the stranger. What do you know of this? The stranger stepped forward. My grandmother told stories of children who felt the shape of storms. They sensed weak points, safe paths, places storms feared. Arne stared at him. Feared? The man nodded. Storms strike strong places. They avoid others. My clan used these stories to guide travel. Liv whispered. Are those stories true? The stranger looked at Leif. Maybe. Arne leaned forward. You think our son hears weaknesses in storms? The stranger's voice softened. I think he hears what keeps danger from swallowing him. Leif lifted his head. It is not hearing. It sits inside the air. Arne exhaled. Should we move the animals inside tonight? Leif nodded. Yes, Arne stood. Liv, help Signa gather the chickens. I will move the goats. Liv rose at once. She touched Leif's shoulder before leaving. Stay where I see you. Leif nodded. The stranger knelt beside Eric, who still looked tired. We help them, he said. We stay busy. Eric nodded. Outside, Arne and the stranger moved through knee-high snow to reach the animal shelters. The goats huddled together under the overhang. Frost clung to their fur. Arne lifted each one and guided them toward the longhouse. The stranger gathered feed buckets. They walked back and forth until all shelters emptied. Liv and Sina carried chickens in their arms. Their feathers shook from the cold. Sina talked softly to each one to keep them calm. Inside the longhouse, the animals pressed close near the rear wall. Their breath warmed the air. Their presence gave comfort too. Animals sensed danger long before people. If they settled, the storm remained distant. As the day stretched on, the sky darkened. A faint rumble sounded far north. Leif looked up at once. Arn turned from the woodpile. "Is it close?" "No," Leif said. "Not yet." The stranger stepped forward. "What changes?" Leif pointed toward the north. "The gap grows. The storm fights it." Arna frowned. "Storms fight?" Leif nodded. "They push against strong places. They try to break them. When something blocks them, they turn." Liv shivered. "Turn toward us?" Leif looked at her. "Maybe later, not now." Arna moved beside him. "How long?" Leif listened again. His eyes narrowed. "Hours," Arna exhaled. "Then we finish before dark." They worked through the rest of the day. They stacked wood high. They packed snow against weak spots in the longhouse wall for insulation. They wrapped ropes around beams. They checked the roof. The sky changed with each passing hour. The clouds thickened. The wind rose in small bursts. Leif watched every shift. When the sun dropped, they gathered inside. The animals settled. The fire burned hot. The stranger and Eric shared a corner. Sina leaned into Liv. Arna sat closest to the door. Leif stood near the wall. He placed his hand flat against the wooden beam. His eyes drifted toward the roof. Arna watched him. "What now?" Leif closed his eyes. He breathed slow. "The storm sees the house." Arna tensed. "Does it come?" Leif shook his head. "It thinks." Arna blinked. "Storms think?" Leif repeated. "It thinks." Liv held Sina tighter. The stranger touched Eric's shoulder. A long silence filled the room. The wind brushed the door with a weak sound. Leif opened his eyes. "It waits," Arna whispered. "For what?" Leif said. "For strength." The stranger stepped forward. "Storms gather strength before they strike. This one wants your land." Arna's chest tightened. "Why?" The stranger's voice softened. "Your valley sits between two mountains. Storms push along these paths. Some storms strike where the land traps them." Arna rubbed his forehead. "So it wants us." "No," the stranger said. "It wants what you have." Arna narrowed his eyes. "What do we have?" The stranger looked at Leif. Arn followed his gaze. He froze. Liv's breath caught. Sina hid her face. The stranger spoke slow. "It wants what carries calm." Leif looked toward the door. "The storm knows me." The fire cracked. A cold wind slid under the frame. Arna rose fast. "It will not take you." Leif did not move. "I hear the gap grow. If it grows more, the storm cannot break the ridge." Arna grabbed his shoulders. "Then stay inside. Stay where I protect you." Leif looked into his father's eyes. "I must listen closer." Arna shook his head. "You do that from here." Leif looked toward the door again. "The wind grows afraid," Eric whispered. "Wind gets afraid?" Leif nodded. "Yes, when storms grow too strong." Arna pulled him close. "You stay with us, no matter what comes." Leif finally nodded. "I stay." The fire burned brighter. The longhouse warmed. The wind outside circled. Snow shifted against the walls. The next storm waited in the dark, gathering its will. Inside the house, Leif listened without fear. Arna watched him without rest. Night settled. A night before danger. A night before the next strike. Night tightened around the longhouse. Cold pressed into the walls. The wind shifted in slow circles, never settling, never striking. Arna felt the weight of it, as he sat near the door, his back stiff, his hand on the wooden beam that braced the frame. Liv fed the fire with steady movements. Sina sat wrapped in furs beside her, half asleep. Eric leaned against his father's side. The stranger rested his arm behind him, steadying his breath. Leif stood at the far end of the room. His palm rested against the beam again. His eyes drifted shut. He listened with deep focus. The firelight flickered across his face. Arna watched him. Every shift of the boy's posture felt heavy in the air. After a long silence, Leif opened his eyes. "It turns," he said. Arna straightened. "Toward us?" "No," Leif answered. "Around us, like it circles a fire." The stranger leaned forward. "How wide is the turn?" Leif tilted his head, listening again. "Wide enough for the storm to grow." Arn's jaw tightened. "How much time?" Leif lifted his hand, palm flat. "Not long." Arna stood. "Liv, we keep the fire high. We stay together in the center of the house." Liv nodded. She added thick logs to the hearth. The flames climbed. Warmth spread across the room. The stranger moved to the door. "I will brace it with you." Arna nodded. "Good." Sina whispered, "Will the storm break the house?" Leif turned toward her. His voice stayed calm. "The house still stands strong. The storm fears the ridge first." Sina blinked. "Storms fear things?" "Yes," Leif said. Liv pulled her daughter close. "You stay with me." The wind pushed against the longhouse again, but not with full force. It slid along the walls like a hand testing the wood. Arna pressed his shoulder to the frame. The stranger did the same. Minutes passed. The sound of the wind changed. At first, it hissed like before. Then it deepened. A low, distant roar rose from the forest edge. Snow swirled against the door. Arna braced harder. "This is the start," the stranger grunted. "Stronger than last night." Outside, something cracked in the forest. A branch snapped. Snow dropped in heavy sheets. Leif stepped forward. "It tests the land." Arna looked at him. "Does it strike the ridge?" Leif closed his eyes again. "Soon." The wind shifted sharply. A gust slammed into the side wall. The longhouse creaked. The animals in the rear stirred. The goats bleated in fear. Chickens rustled their wings. Liv whispered to Sina, "Stay close." Eric sat upright. "Is the storm angry?" Leif turned to him. "It is strong, not angry." Arna felt the frame strain. "Hold steady." The stranger pressed his full weight into the beam. "It searches for weak spots." Another gust hit the roof. Snow slid off in loud sheets. The entire structure shuddered. Liv stood, ready to move toward the children if the roof showed signs of strain. Leif stepped to the center of the room. He stood tall, listening again. Arna watched him from the door. "What now?" Leif lifted his chin. "The ridge blocks some of it, but not enough." Arna's heart thudded. "Will it hit us?" Leif turned toward the door. "Not yet. It waits for the ridge to break." Arna felt cold rise up his spine. "Break?" Leif nodded. "Storms press. Land pushes back. Sometimes land gives first." The stranger cursed under his breath. "If the ridge gives, snow from the upper slope will fall into the valley." Arna looked toward the roof. "How much snow?" "Enough to bury anything not sheltered," the stranger said. Liv tightened her grip on Sina. "How do we stop it?" Leif walked toward the fire. He stared at the flames. "The storm listens too," he said. Arna frowned. "What does that mean?" Leif's voice lowered. "It wants the calm to move." Arna stepped forward fast. "It wants you." Leif didn't answer. The stranger watched him, eyes narrowed. "If the storm presses the ridge for you, then it sees you." Leif kept staring into the flame. "It wants the calm outside." Liv stood. No, you stay inside. No storm takes a child from this house. Arna grabbed Leif's shoulders. You are my son. No wind calls you out that door. Leif looked up at him. I do not walk into storms. I walk into still places. Arna shook his head. I do not care. You stay with us. Leif blinked. If I listen closer, I know where the ridge holds strongest. Arna froze. Liv whispered, You want to tell us where to brace the ridge? Leif nodded. The stranger's eyes widened. If we reinforce the right place before the winds turn stronger, Arna cut him off. It is still dangerous. The storm strikes the ridge. Leif looked toward the door. Not yet. This is the gap before it hits. Arna felt torn. Every instinct wanted his son safe. Every instinct also knew Leif heard something no other person did. Where do we go? Arna asked, voice tight. Leif turned to the far right of the longhouse. The ridge breaks there. The snow rests loose. The stranger grabbed his cloak. We go fast. Arna hesitated. Leif stepped forward. She placed a hand on his arm. We go together, she said. Leave the children here. Arna looked at her, then at Leif, then at the stranger. He nodded once. Sina, Eric, Liv said quickly. Stay by the fire. Do not leave the house. Eric nodded. Sina swallowed, her eyes wide. Arna took 3 thick ropes. The stranger grabbed 2 wooden stakes. Liv took a lantern. Leif stepped toward the door. Arna placed a hand on his chest. You stay inside, Leif shook his head. I need to stand on the ridge to hear where it breaks. Arna felt his throat tighten. No, Leif held his gaze. You need me. Arna closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them. His voice softened. You walk between me and your mother. You do not step away from us. Leif nodded. Liv lifted the door beam. The wind rushed inside. It pulled at their cloaks. Snow swirled around their legs. The storm waited farther north, but its breath touched them with warning. They stepped outside. The stranger closed the door behind them. The wind pushed from the side, not from the front. Snow drifted in long lines across the ground. The ridge loomed ahead. Its shadow covered the lower slope. Leif stepped between his parents. His hair whipped in the wind. He lifted his face. His eyes narrowed. This way, he said. He led them up the ridge path. The snow rose to the knee in places. Arn lifted him over deep drifts. Liv pushed forward, steady and determined. The stranger carried the stakes high to keep them dry. They reached the ridge edge. The wind howled past them, but the full force had not yet hit. Leif stepped forward 2 slow paces. He closed his eyes. Arn gripped his cloak. Do not go farther. Leif lifted a hand. Here. The stranger knelt. This is the weak place? Leif nodded. Snow lies thin. Wind breaks the ridge here first. Arn hammered the first stake with the heel of his palm. The stranger pushed the second into the ground. Liv tied the rope around them. She pulled hard. Her hands shook from cold, but her grip stayed firm. Arna stretched the rope across the ridge. Liv tied the other end to a thick pine trunk. They created a brace to hold part of the slope together. Leif stepped closer to the rope. He placed his hand on it. It holds, he said. Arn let out a breath he didn't realize he held. Good, good. The wind shifted again. A low rumble rose behind the ridge. Leif pointed toward the north. Now it comes. Arna lifted him into his arms. We run. Liv grabbed the stranger's sleeve. Move! They ran down the slope. Snow kicked up behind them. The wind roared across the ridge. The brace rope held tight. The stakes shuddered. Arna felt the ground tremble. Liv looked back. Faster! They reached the Longhouse door as the first heavy gust slammed against the ridge. The sound shook the land. Snow burst downward in a wave. Arna pounded on the door. "Open!" Eric opened it fast. They rushed inside. Liv dropped the lantern. Arna slammed the door shut and dropped the beam into place. Silence held for 1 second. Then the storm struck the ridge. A thunderous roar filled the valley. Snow tumbled against the slope. But the sound changed. Arna recognized it instantly. The drift held. The rope held. The ridge did not break. Leif sat near the fire. He breathed slow, calm. Arna knelt in front of him. He placed his shaking hands on Leif's face. "You kept us safe," he whispered. Leif nodded once. "The storm turns away now?" Arna pulled him close. Liv leaned against both of them. The stranger stood behind them with Eric at his side. Sina crawled into Liv's lap. Outside, the wind screamed in frustration. Inside, the Longhouse stayed warm. The worst storm of Veil. The season hit the valley, but the ridge stood. Because a boy listened to the wind where it held no fear. The storm pressed against the valley for hours. The Longhouse shook now and then, but the walls held. The roof held. The fire burned steady. Liv stirred a pot to keep the children calm. Eric leaned against her side. Sina held her knees tight. The stranger paced near the rear corner, checking every beam. Arna sat near the door with Leif on his lap. The boy rested his head against his father's chest. His breath stayed even. His eyes stayed half open, listening to something no one else heard. Arna watched him without blinking. "You hear the end already?" Arna asked. Leif nodded. "The storm grows tired." Arna let his palm rest on Leif's back. "Good." Outside, the wind's roar shifted again. The thunderous edge softened. Snow still whipped against the walls, but the force behind it loosened. The house groaned less. The ropes tied across the roof beams hummed with steady tension. Liv looked toward Arna. "When do you think it ends?" Arna glanced at Leif. Leif said, "Soon." The stranger knelt beside the fire. If the ridge held with that strength, then this was no normal storm. That wind wanted something. Arna tightened his jaw. It did not get it. The stranger looked at Leif. "It still knows he is here." Arna felt his chest tighten. "Enough. He is my son. Storm or not, nothing takes him." Leif sat up straighter. He looked toward the door again. "It waits outside." Liv wrapped an arm around Sina. "How long?" Leif closed his eyes. "It waits for dawn." Arna breathed out slow. "So we sleep in turns through the night." The stranger nodded. "I take first watch." Arna shook his head. "No, I take it. You save the ridge with us. You rest first." The stranger hesitated, then lowered himself onto a fur blanket. Liv whispered to the children, "Try to sleep." Eric curled up. Sina lay beside her. The storm moved across the roof in slow breaths, no longer violent but still restless, like a living presence searching for the last spark of resistance. The fire cracked. Arna held Leif close. "You sleep now." Leif shook his head. "The storm listens through the night. I should listen too." Arna lowered his voice. "You sleep. I listen for you." Leif did not argue. He placed his head on Arna's shoulder. His breathing slowed. Minutes turned into hours. Arna stared at the door. The wind eased little by little. Snow piled high against the frame. The night pressed on. By midwinter dawn, the storm had lost its voice. A weak light crept over the valley. The Longhouse felt still. Arna stood slowly, moved stiff legs toward the door, and lifted the beam with careful hands. "Stay behind me," he said. Liv stood with him. The stranger came forward as well, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Arna pushed the door open. Snow fell inward in a soft wall. He stepped out through it. The air felt calm, cold but calm. The ridge stood tall. The rope brace sagged with frozen weight, but it held. Liv stepped out. Behind him, her breath left her in a white cloud. "We are safe." The stranger walked through the snow, testing the frozen drifts. The ridge never broke. The boy's sense is sharper than any hunter I met. Arna looked back at the door. "Stranger, you never told us your name." The man brushed snow off his cloak. "I am called Rurik," Arna nodded. "You helped us save this valley." Rurik looked toward the forest. "I helped because your son heard something worth defending." Arna looked at the longhouse door. "He hears things beyond us." Rurik stepped closer. "You know what this means?" Arna's throat tightened. "Tell me." Rurik folded his arms. "There are people who sense storms before they strike. In the far north, I saw a line of them once, children who heard wind as if it talked. They lived near glaciers. They guided hunters and kept whole villages safe." Arna frowned. "You think my son belongs with them?" "No," Rurik said. "But he has the same hearing." Arna felt a weight settle inside him. "He is still a boy," Rurik nodded, "which is why storms search for him." Arna's jaw tightened. "Then storms meet me first." Rurik gave a faint nod. "Good." They stepped back into the longhouse. Liv gathered the children and wrapped them in blankets. Sina smiled weakly. Eric rubbed his eyes. Leif sat up. The storm left. Arna knelt before him. "It did." Leif looked at Rurik. "But it knows me." Rurik sat beside him. "Storms know strength. They feel things we do not." Leif's voice stayed calm. "It followed me since the forest." Arna blinked. "What?" Leif looked down. "It knew me before it reached the valley." Liv sat beside him fast. "Why did you not tell us?" Leif whispered. "I did not want you afraid." Arna pulled him close. "We stand stronger when we know what hunts us." Leif rested his head against Arna's chest. "It is safe now." Rurik rose. "For now." Liv stood. "What do we do next?" Arna looked toward the valley. "We repair what broke. We dig out the fields. We help our neighbors." Rurik nodded. "The storm hit every house in the valley. Some will need help fast." Arna looked at Liv. "You stay here with the children. Keep the fire strong." Liv nodded. "Go." Arna and Rurik gathered tools and stepped outside. Snow stretched across the valley in uneven slopes. Some roofs leaned heavy under the weight. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. Other homes looked dark. They walked to the nearest longhouse. Arna knocked. A weak voice answered. He opened the door. A family huddled inside, shaken but alive. Rurik helped lift fallen beams. Arna shoveled snow from the entry. They checked the roof. It held, but barely. Arna returned home after an hour. Liv stood near the door. "Are they safe?" she asked. Arna nodded. "They live. We help the rest." Liv looked toward Leif. "He should stay inside today." Arna agreed. "He rests. He saved us already." Leif sat by the fire, hands cupped in front of the flame. He looked tired, but steady. Sina ran to him. "Tell me when storms sleep." Leif smiled softly. "I will." Arna stepped out again with Rurik. They moved house by house. They pulled heavy snow from roofs. They checked beams. They gathered neighbors from collapsed shelters. Many people thanked them. Many looked toward the ridge with wide eyes. More than one villager said, "The ridge held because someone guided it." Arna did not explain. He only nodded. As the day stretched into late light, the storm's last clouds drifted east. The valley began to breathe again. Arna and Rurik returned home at dusk. Smoke rose from the Longhouse chimney. Warm light glowed through the cracks. When they entered, Leif hugged Arn tightly. Rurik removed his cloak and sat near the fire. "The valley stands because your son heard it." Arna looked at Leif. He kneeled beside him again. "Do storms follow you always?" Leif thought for a moment. "No, only when they feel lost." Arna blinked. "Lost?" Leif nodded. "This storm searched for a place to end. It searched for something steady. It found me." Arna felt his pulse slow. "And you helped it end," Leif nodded. "Storms end when someone listens." Liv sat beside them. "And you listened." Leif leaned against her shoulder. Rurik watched the boy with calm eyes. "You protect more than your home. You protect every life that stands near you." Arna took his son's hand. "We protect you too." Leif nodded. "I know." The wind outside fell silent. Snow lay smooth across the valley. Smoke curled upward in thin lines. The Longhouse warmed through the night. Leif slept beside his family with a peaceful breath. The storm no longer searched for him, and the valley knew the truth. Some Vikings slept through storms that tore homes apart, not because they were strong, but because someone inside their home listened to the wind with a calm that storms could not break. Thank you for staying through this long story. You walked with Leif from the first sharp gust to the last quiet breath of the storm. You heard the wind shift with him. You watched a valley hold on through a night that would break others. Your time here brought life to a calm corner of Viking history. Before you head out, take one slow breath. Let your jaw relax. Let your hands rest. Let the warmth of the Longhouse stay with you a little longer. Tell me where you watched from. I enjoy seeing where these quiet tales travel. If you want more calm Viking stories, you are welcome to subscribe, like, or leave a soft comment. It helps guide the next story for you. In the next video, I will tell you about a hunter who learned to track by silence alone. I left a small freebie in the description. Rest well until then.